Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. I request all of you to please settle down. Honorable Minister is here. He will be arriving here anytime soon. Policy landscape, emphasizing the country's cultural values and global ambitions, and also explores the significance of India's historical heritage. The book discusses India's evolving role in the global arena, emphasizing the importance of transparent digital realms, resilient supply chains, and strategic economic decisions. Without further ado, I would like to call Honorable Minister of External Affairs of India, Dr.S. Jaishankar, to put forward his remarks on the book.
Thank you. I'll do that steady.
Yes, yes.
Good afternoon, and it's always good to be in UAE, in Dubai, and it's always good to talk about your book, and to do both is really a great day for me. I think what might be useful would be if I explain what was going through my mind, why I wrote the book, what was the message I was trying to convey. Maybe that would be a good starting point for the conversation. And simply put, I felt that after about a little more than 40 years in diplomacy, I was looking at a world which was changing very profoundly, and I had a sense increasingly that not everybody was getting it. So, in a sense, both this book and the one I wrote a few years before were an attempt to try to share my understanding of what was changing, but with a certain objective, which was really to say, in this changing world, how can India get the best of it, or how do we really make the best use of it? Now, when we speak about a changing world, I've laid out different aspects of it. The re-globalization, in a way, that the old globalization is no longer working, so something else is being done. The rebalancing, which is the weight of different countries, relative weight of countries vis-a-vis each other, how that is changing, and therefore how relationships change. Increasingly, the de-risking of the international economy, I would say almost the global order, which is facing so many challenges. So countries often gear their diplomacy to make sure that things don't go completely off the rails. Then you have two countries in particular who keep coming up like major characters in a book, and no surprise, one is the United States, the other is China. The US is an interesting character, if you can call it that, because this character is actually redefining how the rest of the world, how it relates to the rest of the world and how the rest of the world perceives it. And the other character, China, is actually rising, pushing, testing limits in different ways. So you have already this changing world, and among them these characters. And of course, I keep coming back to this question of what does it mean for India. Now, when I speak about changing world, transformation, disruption, there are some obvious examples in front of you all. the COVID is an example. The economic disruptions of an era is an example. The Ukraine conflict, which is still going on, is another. The Middle East, what is going on there. What is happening in the Indo-Pacific, the recurrence, in a sense the world is more nationalistic today. In some ways it is more insular. It is certainly much more self-centered than it was before. And if you put in this mix, throw in technology, throw in AI, throw in green, clean technologies, electric mobility, changes in our way of life. And if all of that wasn't enough, just make sure that you're factored in extreme climate events, which can be disruptive by themselves. So look at this kind of picture that I'm presenting. This is really, the pot is boiling, the characters are changing, the balances are changing, the relationships are affected by all of this. And then I present to you an India which is changing partly because of all of this, but autonomously as well, where in a way all the accumulated impact of the democratization of Indian society, the greater opportunities, the prosperity, the aspirational India, the demography, and in many ways, I am putting this to you. I don't quite use those words. If you look at Indian politics, at Indian civil services, look at the Indian cricket team, they are far more diverse. The message which I put, especially my first book was called The India Way. My second book is called Why Bharat. Modi himself is very representative, symbolic of all of this. Now, once you have this picture, the message of my book, because it had an intent, the message of my book is that we need to think through the problems and the challenges and the opportunities for ourselves. That we should take proffered or inherited wisdom carefully. They are often or with a particular bias. So when we look today at, should we open, should our economy be, there are today judgments, about politics, about the quality of democracy, about cultures, is there a global culture? Is something which is applicable or practiced in one society, should it be easily transferable to another? Is there such a thing actually as a global cultural norm? Because these are today very key issues. That often what happens is the dominant cultures or societies or countries, they are almost hegemonic in their pushing lot of these ideas. So if something is good in a university campus in a country, they would try to make it out as though it's sort of a universal truth, which everybody must accept. Some of what I have tried to do is to push that point that it's important to think through for yourself. The other message I have, which was particularly targeted towards young Indians, was that take an interest in foreign policy. Because whether they like it or not, the world is coming to their homes. And the COVID was the most graphic example of this. So if students go out, if people go out, to study, people go out as tourists, as professionals, or even if you are at home, events outside can actually shape your well-being, your security, your comfort. So it's a kind of a pitch which someone who spent a life in foreign policy is now making to the entire country, saying, listen to me, I'm actually more important and relevant to your lives than you thought I was. So please pay more attention to what I'm doing. Then of course the idea that this world of ours, because often the debates of our days, including till recently, they are like there's an accepted norm, and any deviation from that is catastrophic. Whereas actually the reality of the world is that there is a diversity of the world. I mean, if there are 193 countries in the world, then clearly there's going to be a big spread of views and values and practices and culture. And I would argue the world is returning to its natural diversity after centuries of dominance by a few countries or by a few regions. And a more diverse world will have different conversations. It cannot be a conversation between two blocks. It cannot be a conversation between one big center and the rest of the world. So when people, when I often end up on stages where people say, you got to choose, so you got to choose our choices which somebody else is putting before me and limiting it to something finite. Now, if there are 193 countries in the world, there are at least 193 choices. So how do you, in a sense, really create a more democratized world? Then, in a way, I've somewhat provocatively gone back into parts of our history. There's a chapter called The Roads Not Taken, which is to look at choices which were made by our leaders and to audit it. Audit it not with the benefit of today's hindsight, but look at it with fresh eyes and ask ourselves, at that time, did somebody else have a different view? And did that view actually have some worth? That if he had opted at that time in 1950 or 1955 or 1960 or 70, whatever it is, if he had not taken choice A but choice B, where would we be today? I think it's at least intellectually, even politically, an interesting, provocative choice. Now, having said all that, just if I could explain the layout or the format of the book. In my first book, I had a chapter on one of the epics of India called the BHARAT, which is an epic which is much more commonly associated with statecraft. So I took that epic and tried to find analogous situations in real life. Now, I was, while marketing my first book, I was actually challenged by someone whether I could attempt something similar with another epic, which is the older epic, Ramayana. And it's not a saga which typically people associate with, high politics, diplomacy, statecraft. It's much more ethical, moral narrative in a way. But as someone who grew up steeped in this, I felt that I could use that as a messaging. That in the Ramayana, it's the story of the king, Lord Rama, Prabhu Shri Ram. So think of him like a rising power, like India. And what happens is, there is a sort of a preparation, then there is a training, then he's tested, there are tactics, there are strategies, there are ethics, and then there are some grand, there's a sort of grand finale. I mean, do you actually do this, can you actually bring yourself to address this enormous task before you? So in some ways, his life story is also a sort of a paradigm which is similar to a country like India, a big country, which is constantly tested, which has to make its choices, which has its dilemmas, like he has. Now, I've taken different facets of that epic the unintended consequences. Both Lord Ram and the other big character, the Demon King Ravan, they both at various points of time take actions which have consequences they couldn't have foreseen. Or, for example, the idea even of diplomats. Again, because of the colonial period, a lot of our diplomatic models are Western models. Whereas actually in Ramayana you have a great diplomat, which is the monkey king Hanuman, who's sent as an emissary, and he exceeds expectations in the performance of his diplomatic tasks. But not just, he's the one everybody would know. But there are others who people don't normally think. There's another monkey king called Angad, and the mind games he plays when he's sent on a task. Or his mother, who's actually very astute, who's able to calm down very roiled situations. Then I come to a big rivalry in that story, which is between two sages. One is an established one is a rising one, and the tensions between them which drive that story, which is Kaushik and Vashisht. Then the root cause, in a way, of the whole, the predicament of Rama, which is that his father gives boons to his stepmother, who exercises it. It's somewhat similar to countries who help other countries to grow, not realizing that it could come back and haunt them. And I think in today's day and age, you don't have to tell which country helped which country to grow. I think most of us know that. Or it could be, tests of strength, the need for allies. When we speak about Ram, he has a stepbrother, but they are almost like a joint at the hip, that you talk of them like a pair. So the importance of having allies, the importance of building coalitions. Like Lord Ram, to go to Lanka, has to create a coalition of the monkey army, but of other creatures, how to manage a coalition, how to keep that going. So what I've done is I've taken episodes of the Ramayana and tried to bring out one particular challenge today that Indian foreign policy has: building coalitions, finding allies, making difficult choices, competing with other countries. How do you resolve some of the difficult moral, ethical dilemmas? So that's sort of the manner in which I've sought to present it. In some ways, you can say I was perhaps indulging myself by doing all of this, but certainly I felt using a historical, cultural, civilizational context, using those analogies and examples today is both a way of communicating, but it's also a way of stirring some awareness, so that people start to think about our own past, in a somewhat different way, start using many of these examples and analogies. And when people do that, I can tell you it gives you great satisfaction. So once again, really thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Thank you for listening to me patiently, for a chance to explain what the book is about. And over to you.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insights. Now, I hand over the floor to Ms. Isobel to take us through discussion, followed by questions and answers.
So, first of all, Salam Alaikum, and thank you all for being here today for this very, very special occasion with His Excellency. When I was given a copy of this book, I didn't know how to take it, because I'm not a politician, and as we were speaking earlier, my sort of knowledge of policies that you would need for one of certainly the largest democracy in the world, and the way that life is changing so quickly, I didn't know what to expect, but then I found in each of the 11 essays or chapters something that took me back in time into your history and gave you another sort of illustration and picture of the points you were making about the challenges, but then giving us another way of examining it. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant. Now thank you all for the wonderful questions you've sent in, and we're going to tackle those, but because I'm sat here on the stage, I have a little bit of an advantage that I'm going to ask you a couple of questions first and then go over. So, the worldview. You wrote in an earlier book, Engage America, Manage China, Cultivate Europe, Reassure Russia, Bring Japan into play, and Draw neighbours in. Is that viewpoint as relevant today?
I think yes, it has. I don't think it's fundamentally changed. When I wrote it, it was not my intention to suggest any of it would be easy. Definitely in the years that have passed, recent years, some of them have tested us. We have to be nimble, for example, to stay in tune and in touch with the changes in America. It has taken a greater effort in regard to Russia because of the Ukraine conflict and all that came with it. With China, we've been through a very difficult patch. At the time when I wrote the first book, obviously none of us foresaw that, at least the intensity. Again, Europe today, even Japan to different degrees are affected by the turbulence of the world. And our neighborhood has seen its own share of ferment. So the answer is a yes, but it has taken a lot of effort, I would say, dexterity, energy, even generosity. I mean, one of our neighbors, for example, slid into an extreme economic crisis, Sri Lanka, which required us to step forward in a way in which we have never done in our history before with any other country. So life is complicated, but having said that, I would still stay with that formula.
Thank you. And as we're sat here in the amazing, iconic Mohammed bin Rashid Library, surrounded by more than 1 million books, and ancient books and modern books, what I have always felt about Indian culture is the impact has grown and grown and grown. We are returning to the ancient Ayurvedic medicine. We're returning to the things that generations ago were practiced in India. We have yoga, we have meditation, we have the wonderful writers, the culture, Bollywood, music. You look at it, it is such a powerful culture. Where is the place of culture in diplomacy?
I think it has a place, and I would argue that most of all that place is in the mindset. Which is, when you have old civilization and all the traditions and the narratives and the saga and the wisdom which comes with it, when you are confronted with problems, so much of it has seeped into all of us that the way we look at it tends to be a little different. So, if I were to look today at the world, okay, let me give you a very sort of a major happening, the war in Ukraine. I think it's almost an Indian instinct to realize very early on that the battlefield is not going to provide the answer. I mean, in a sense, there is I know I'm stereotyping it a bit, and I enter that caveat even as I give the answer. There are cultures and regions and countries where they want solutions, they want decisive solutions, and they want fast solutions. Not everything in life is amenable to it. Often you need, it's very complicated, you need to figure out, there's an element of patience in it, there's an element of trying to bridge, gaps. Today, when we push the line that, look, you have to come back to dialogue and diplomacy in Ukraine, you're not going to get a military solution or a battlefield solution for what has happened. Today, people, after, into the third year of this war, are much more open to realizing it. So, I think societies like India culturally take a long view. It also has some shortcomings. It's not always a virtue. I mean, sometimes maybe we should be more resolute and decisive in our response to problems. But on the whole, I would say in diplomacy, the tendency to develop relationships, to take a more considered view, and not be hustled into what might end up as big mistakes. I think those are some aspects of it.
Thank you. Now we're going to move on to questions from the floor, and I'm going to ask 3 questions for His Excellency to answer. I will also give the name of those who've sent these questions in, and if you want to stand up and hear the answer, then please do so when we come to that. So the first one is from Brijesh Kishore Kumar Dhruv from Enoch, and his question, thank you for standing up. How would you describe Bharat's role in the world? Like a chess grandmaster making strategic moves, or more like a quiet powerhouse whose influence grows through wisdom and subtlety? That's the first question. So the second one is, how is the government working to channel the entrepreneurial energy of Bharat? Is Startup India looking beyond the major cities? And then we had a late question that I'm going to insert in here because it came in recently, just 20 minutes before we started. In your first book, all the other quotations are from historical figures. The only contemporary one is from Donald Trump. In your book, while Bharat... Did I say something? Figure. Yes, Donald Trump. Or DT, shall we say. In your book, While Bharat Matters, even though it was written last year, you are still writing about Donald Trump's ideas. Please explain. And that's from Prashant Gulati. Yeah. Oh, thank you. So you've got those three questions to start.
The chess master or the powerhouse, right?
Yes, chess master, yes. It's between like a chess grandmaster making strategic moves, or more like a quiet powerhouse.
Maybe a mix of both. Because on the one hand, I think when countries rise, big countries rise, they need to calculate the moves, they need to think through what they're doing, what would be the second, third order consequences, exactly like you would do. And, what do you do in a chess game, or for that matter in any complex sport? I mean, you would anticipate the response, you would build your response to the response, take it 2-3 levels down. That is necessary to do now. But having said that, the fact is also our capabilities are more, our influence is more, our contribution is more. So, and you want to use it without necessarily broadcasting it. You don't want to be in your face. You want to be, molding people's thinking positively, and yet appearing to do that without being visibly calculating about it. So, I think to the extent you are a chess grandmaster who's a quiet powerhouse, I think that sort of generally works for us.
Great question.
The second question, the startup. One of the changes I see a lot of changes in India, and I must tell you, in the last few years, I've been traveling an enormous amount. And for me, in fact, the general election campaign we did, was really an eye-opening experience, simply because as a person who spent a large part of his life outside the country, it gave me a great opportunity to go around. And I'll tell you two changes that I saw. One, which I spoke about, that I see a much more representative India, in the corners of India, places where, that awareness has reached every place, aspiration has reached every place. So there's no part of India which says, it is my fate to be left behind, or somebody else is going ahead and that's fine, I can wait it out. Everybody today is equally impatient, that's one. But the second part relates to this question. I've been to some universities. Now, typically, when a minister turns up at the university, you line up your best students and say, these are the gold medalists of this institution. I've had quite a few experiences where people said, I want you to meet these 6 students. They have patents. I want you to meet those 10 students. They have startups. I want you to spend another 2 hours. We want to take you to an exhibition of what our students are doing. So today, for me, this kind of thinking, which honestly would not have been there. Forget my generation, even many between us and today, between me and someone who's 20 years old today. That is a very big change in the thinking of people. And you can even see this, one of the interesting things which is happening in India today is more people with the confidence to do their own thing. In fact, a big even uptick in self-owned businesses. So there is, I think, a kind of a confidence and a different logic out there. And when I pair that with the embrace of technology that I see in the country, I have actually, traveling around the world, I have not seen any society which has embraced digital technology the manner Indians have done. In this one, believe me, I'm not overstating it, we are way ahead of the rest of the world. And when I see that kind of technology embrace paired with this kind of growing self-confidence and the willingness of young people to sort of back themselves up, and the willingness of a government and a prime minister who kind of encourages that, I think that has certainly a very big message for the realization of a developed India. The third question, in my first book, yes, that's true, I had a number of, I would say the only living person I quoted, had a quotation, was Donald Trump. And the reason I did that, I guess, was, and I say this not as a foreign minister, not even as a diplomat, but as someone who studied international relations. Everybody else, every major player today is working within an established framework to improve or change what it is they see around them. No, there is really nobody of that kind of standing who's actually looking outside that framework, who's willing to challenge the basic assumptions of that framework, which is certainly worth a look. Now, why does he continue into the second book? He continues into the second book because even though, and just so that you understand it, I wrote the first book 2018-19, okay? Donald Trump is the president. So definitely, he's dominating figure on the world stage. I wrote the second book in 22-23. In 22-23, he's not. But here's the interesting point. A lot of what he has advocated, what he has worked for, what presumably will now become again part of the American agenda and therefore the global agenda. They still remained on the agenda even though he was not the president. You know, for example, this very mistaken belief that globalization would help all countries in the world. Now, the reality is otherwise. You know, globalization has hollowed out many economies. It has done great damage to working class in many countries. It has particularly hit small and medium businesses in some societies. It has been an ideological cover to preach a certain kind of value system to the whole world. Now, each of these are a challengeable proposition. And in my view, you know, Indians should also think this through. You know, we often associate these kinds of challenges to thinking, understandably, with Donald Trump, because he's been the most visible figure arguing that. But I would say, as an Indian, I certainly believe much of it applies to me as well. My businesses have got hit in globalization. My working class has got hurt during this process. I hear lectures from various gurus, global gurus in the world, about how I should be running my life and how good my democracy is, and it's not. And I see no reason why I should put up with it. So I do think today that he is a person of really quite an exceptional significance. And again, I'm not saying this as a foreign minister. This is a sort of an intellectual, I would say almost a professional political science evaluation of it.
Thank you. And then the third one was, no, because I've not asked it, that was the third one. So the next three, this is from Manu Jain, the CEO of G42 India. And it is, with the growth of AI and given India's deep technology expertise, how do you see digital diplomacy shaping India's collaboration with countries leading in AI innovation? What do you think India needs to do to become an AI superpower? I add, if you are not already a superpower.
Would you like to give me three at a go?
Please. Huh?
No, would you
three?
like to? Yeah.
You are quite right, sorry. How is India approaching climate change in its foreign policy, especially in negotiations like COP29, where both developed and developing countries have differing priorities? That's from Sagar Kasar, Axis Bank DIFC. And the third question is, will we see change in India's stance in providing dual citizenship to Indian citizens in the near future? From Raghu Vamsi from Exabeam.
The first question about AI and digital diplomacy, I would say that AI probably is the biggest issue, biggest challenge in a way confronting diplomacy, but confronting actually almost pretty much everything in life. It has the most radical transformational possibilities, and it has a potential which I guess we don't even fully understand or even imagine at this point of time. Now, does it call for, how does it impact diplomacy, because that's where you are sort of seeking to go? I think it is already a big issue. It's a big issue in two ways. There's a competitive aspect to AI. So can there be some kind of global compact with regard to AI guardrails? People use different words for it. It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard because precisely because it has such a game-changing possibility that any regime, any discipline involves a certain amount of restraint. And in an intensely competitive domain, that's going to be very difficult to get countries to accept. On the other hand, because it's so competitive and because it's so impactful, there are also huge incentives for countries to collaborate. So I'm guessing that you're going to have a very sharpened global rivalry because of AI, and you're going to have very deep friendships or understandings in the world because you're going to have AI. So it's a paradox in a way, but that's sort of broadly where I think we're going to go. And certainly, because I'm here right now in Dubai, I think between India and UAE, there's a clearly an opportunity here, which is I think already beginning to be explored. The climate issue. You know, when I talk about the changes in India in the last decade, climate action would be one of them. We've become very enthusiastic proponents and practitioners of clean and green technologies. But it's, you know, some of the old traditional problems, in many cases, we have to press on, keep the pressure up, but at the same time also autonomously find solutions. You know, don't let the developed countries hold the rest of the world hostage in this. But don't let them off the hook either. I think the two objectives have to be both worked upon. Certainly, you know, we have seen in India, I would say, sort of a massive solarization of the country. And one of the interesting initiatives of the third term of the Modi government is actually to do rooftop solar, probably on a scale which has never been attempted in history. So it will have very interesting, not just energy consequences, even you know, it will impact, for example, the adoption of electric mobility down the road. It will have a, you know, in a way it will, because you're going to have a lot of micro decentralized production, energy production, it will have other consequences for the grid load, etc. So even socio-economic consequences for individual households. But there are, I would say, again, if I take it at the level of diplomacy, there are serious discussions today underway of long-term, you know, of I would say long-distance energy transmission, including on the seas. So the idea, you know, Prime Minister Modi has this idea of one sun, one world, one grid. The idea being that you keep generating solar and keep moving it across the world as the day progresses. But today there are serious discussions both to the east of India and to the west of India of this long distance transmission projects and their viability, and I would not be surprised if, you know, some of these were actually to materialize in the not very distant future. On the dual citizenship, yes, it is a continuing debate in a way, because, you know, clearly India would like its people to remain as closely attached to the country wherever they happen to reside. But there are different angles to it. You know, there are legal issues, there are issues sometimes of the country concerned. Not everybody, you know, India may want dual citizenship, but the other country may have reservations. Not everybody is necessarily open to it. There are, as I said, legal, could be political, even security complexities. At the moment, we are, you know, what was decided during Prime Minister Vajpayee's government, which is overseas citizenship. But it is a subject which we continue to debate both with the diaspora, within the country, within the government.
Thank you, thank you. So the next three questions, Your Excellency. What what's the secret of your success is the first one, and that's from Sridharith VC,
Right.
Autodesk Middle East. And the second question in this group, which industries and skills should policymakers focus on in the next few years to put India on top of the human race and the world map? And the third question in this group, what are the benefits of investing in India for the non-resident Indians in the UAE?
Well, I'm not quite sure how to answer that secret of success question. I think probably what anybody, and in a sense everybody, would benefit by is really to have the opportunities, to have the right people to work with. It's great to have good bosses, by the way. That's a great secret of success. So I would, and you need a fair share of luck as well. But I would say by the grace of God, things have in many ways worked out. I mean, I would have never imagined that I would end up as a minister. So I leave it at that. On the, what are the skills and the, look, we are going to be very intensely immersed in technology. I mean, that is really the change that is coming. But because of that, it doesn't mean that the old activities and the old professions, they don't come to an end. I mean, no transition is abrupt. So there's a kind of a continuum. And what would happen is many of the newer things would seep into what already exists. So if people have been farming, they would today have opportunities, or tomorrow have opportunities to technology which will allow them to do it better. I mean, in India, for example, there's a growing use of nano fertilizers, which is far more effective. And you'd be surprised in how many farms today people use drones as part of agricultural practices. So our challenge today is a lot of countries struggle with adequate demography. Right now we don't. Our challenge is to put that demography to the best possible advantage. And you can do that most of all by preparing them. And there isn't a single preparation. I mean, it starts with, frankly, almost birth or pre-birth. How are they born healthier? How is the weight at birth higher? How is the mother's, how is the early nutrition? How is the postnatal care? From health, how do you get them into education? How do you encourage school retention? As they move into adulthood, what are the opportunities which they have? And, when people read about changes in India, the natural inclination is to focus on that particular message, saying, we're building more bathrooms, we are creating more houses, we are doing better health coverage, all of which is true. But if you start connecting the dots, you see from pre-birth to post-pension, I mean, you are actually almost every part of that life cycle. Somewhere, there are interventions along the way to make this better. But the key would be at the most relevant economic age, productive age. How do you actually make the human potential sort of the best, the most contributive? So today, I would say education, skilling, internships, this is today a huge, and obviously along with that the employment opportunities, because if you skill without, a pathway forward, it doesn't work. So, in this term, from day one, some of you may remember the finance minister's budget speech, that it's been, there's a very heavy focus, this idea that our greatest resources are human resources, and we are not getting the best out of them. We have to find better ways of preparing them, and I think here, this is one area where really those who live outside India can also make contributions in different ways, including by supporting internships and vocational training in India. In terms of investing in India, the third question, I would say right now, this is still an economy which has multiple decades of 7, 8, 9% growth ahead of it, and where if one looks at the industries of the future, which are going to be much more knowledge economy driven, as I said, much more technology driven, this is the right time to look at India. The rest of the world has started to look at India. Indians living outside India have an inside track into India. They know India better than any foreigner would ever know India. So I would say to you, this is the time to put your money on India.
And the next three questions: how does India plan to leverage its G20 presidency to address the technological disparities between developed and developing nations, particularly in areas like digital infrastructure and cybersecurity? That's from Himanshu Jain from the Maths Quotient. And next question: over the past decade, India-West relations have significantly improved. However, this progress is not reflected in Western media, NGOs and intelligentsia, which often portray India, and particularly its government, with skepticism. How can India move from merely highlighting these issues to actively changing these perceptions within influential Western institutions? And that's from Amarpreet Singh from Up Capita. And then the third question: with BHARAT's growth growing internationally, how do you think the country can balance domestic priorities with international expectations and responsibilities? From Nitin Junjehawala from Citibank. Apologies for my pronunciation.
Okay. We are, the G20 every year has a rotating host, but it also has a troika, the previous one and the next one. We were the host last year, we are the part of the troika this year. And the current chair, the presidency, is with Brazil. We are headed in the next few days to Brazil for the summit. We've been very pleased that many of the ideas which were set forth in India's G20 presidency were carried forward in the Brazilian one, and hopefully after that will be South Africa. We expect them to do that as well. Now, on the digital public infrastructure, we pushed it very strongly because we ourselves had a very good experience. We have a track record. So when India speaks about its virtues, I can back it up with very practical examples on the ground. And that makes it credible for the rest of the world. Secondly, we have seen its impact on good governance, on economic efficiency, on problems that we see a large part of the global south also has. So, one of our big issues before was really when you distribute, when you give people benefits, whether it's in cash or in kind, whether it's food or medicine or actually payment for wages. The reality is a very large part of it would disappear in the hands of middlemen. What the digital public infrastructure has done, because it has created that backbone and that mapping and that ability to do the direct transfer, and we got everybody to open a bank account, it's actually had a transformational impact on this whole socio-economic delivery and the benefits delivery. We have seen other countries actually approach companies with Indian companies who've been involved in this exercise to try to get them to come and do something similar or parts of it in their countries. But we are hoping that this is not left to the individual choices of countries, that there is some larger support system, that the World Bank or the multilateral development institutions, or even the philanthropic bodies, to the extent they support all of this. Some of the changes, at least that we've seen in India, would then be visible with others, and that's been frankly quite a mission for us, and we feel it is inching forward, but there's still work to do. The second issue, the West, it goes back to one of the earlier answers I gave. We tend to think of the West in an undifferentiated way. That is not the reality. There is the West and the West. There are parts of the West which certainly, see the changes in India, are objective about it. In many cases, they understand what is a common interest. They have a respect. They're willing to work with us, which is why we have many of the advances which we have with the West. On the other hand, I would say there is an ideological stream which doesn't, which is not necessarily comfortable with some of these changes in India, which feels that the hold that they had, the manner in which they would shape thinking, the dominance almost which they exercised. If that is being challenged, then they want in a way to delegitimize it. So you have these exercises, this whole ratings exercises, ratings on political integrity, ratings on levels of freedom, of free speech, of media, etc. Now, some of them end up with completely bizarre results. I've seen. I remember once seeing a report which said that the press in Afghanistan was freer than the press in India. Oh. So, and even if one looks at, let us say, political freedoms. Now, today we are actually seeing how much self-censorship it is, how much groupthink there is, and how intolerant that groupthink is about any deviation from that groupthink. So censorship doesn't mean a bureaucrat who cuts you off. A much more dangerous form of censorship is actually an establishment coming together and saying, we will not allow anybody who is different from us to actually get a following, get a hearing. That is equally the case. Or the idea that, this, if you take some particular issue, this way, this lifestyle, because I like this lifestyle, you must also adopt this lifestyle. And if you don't, then that's a black mark against you in whichever rating that they're doing. So, what's one of the interesting things about a globalized world is the domestic arguments are no longer domestic. Okay, this is like you're having a fight in your house, but the entire street is brought into the fight, and the street's fight, by the way, also becomes your fight within the house. So there is this dynamic today between the world and any country. It's not peculiar to India, but we have been definitely at the receiving end of a lot of this. One, because big changes are taking place, and two, because we are contesting that kind of lecturing and the homilies. And if you push back, there's a reaction to that as well. The third question. Domestic and international priorities. Here's an interesting insight for what it is worth. There are many countries in the world today where foreign policy is not popular. When foreign ministers generally meet, which we do from time to time, some part of our discussion is how hard it is to get money to run foreign policy, how difficult the rest of the government is, how the people of that country don't the question often you are asked is, why are you spending our money outside the country? That is today quite pervasive. It's not universal, but it's there. Now, India is a different case, and a large part of the answer is all of you. Because India is globalized, because we have a large diaspora, because the diaspora is so closely linked with India, actually the interest and awareness about the world is growing. So I must also tell you, I said one of the purposes of writing a book was to tell people, please take more interest in foreign policy. Let me tell you, much of that advice has fallen on willing ears. That young people today are far more interested in what is happening in the world than they were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And within the government, there is an appetite. I mean, if you look today at, one example I would give you is these kind of crisis situations. The Houthis are firing at somebody, there's an earthquake in Turkey, there's a landslide somewhere else. Actually, you see India stepping forward more and more. The Sri Lanka example was one example I gave. So, India is globalizing, India is growing domestically. In our case, there is no tension between the two. I mean, people see one as reinforcing the other. We are not insecure about the world. We are sort of positive about the world. We think other countries having good relations will do more good than would do harm. I mean, obviously there are some odd exceptions to that rule, but by and large, I would say we have a very sunny disposition towards the world.
Thank you. So, post third term of Prime Minister Modi, has the implementation of reforms which were early spoken about being delayed or being done silently, as we don't see and hear at them at the same pace as earlier? So it's the implementation of reforms that were spoken about, are they delayed or are they being done behind the scenes, as it were? The next question is, as India becomes more powerful economically on a global scale, the relationship with neighbouring nations appears to be weakening. What can be done to benefit those relationships and nations? And the third question, is Trump going to be a real success? We can't escape. Okay, it is in the news. Let's have an expert tell us, please.
On the reforms, no, I would argue that in fact, in the third term, some really big reforms were announced fairly early. This includes the creation of 12 industrial zones across the country. A whole slew of infrastructure projects were announced, some of them linked with this, some of them independent of it, including, by the way, some ports which would be linked to UAE and in a way become a takeoff point for the IMEC corridor. A big push which I've spoken about on education, on internship, on skilling. Very strong support to agriculture so that there is a sort of, it ensures that there are incentives for food security. Expansion of the health coverage. Perhaps what has happened is so many things are changing with so much regularity that change has become the norm, and maybe people don't see if change was an exception, maybe it stands out more. I think you're just seeing a very fast-paced evolution, one after another, and that probably gives you this sense. I mean, that's the only explanation I can offer. Where our neighbors are concerned, for every country, neighbors are always very special because by definition they are neighbors. You're much closer to them than you are to anybody else. And that closeness has obviously many advantages, but the closeness also has some inherent, frictions or divergences in them, insecurities could be in them. Now, if you look at India, we are blessed in having many neighbors of varying kinds, land neighbors, sea neighbors, tropical neighbors, I mean, you name it, we have it. Now, each one of them, has their own cycle of politics. They have their own, debates. They also evolve, and part of their evolution is also the relationship between us changes. So, perhaps what is true is each of these relationship itself is a dynamic relationship. There's no fix. So, you can't say it was like that 5 years ago, why is it not like this now? It's not like this now because 5 years have passed, and no relationship can stand still at one particular point of time. Now, in many cases, in recent times, we have seen changes. We have seen political changes. We saw it in Maldives, we saw it in Sri Lanka, we saw it in Bangladesh, we saw it even in Pakistan. In Nepal, combination of parties keep forming and reforming their alliances. Now, if you actually look at it, if you take, I take Sri Lanka as the most notable example. I have lived in Sri Lanka through some very difficult years. I've seen, times when a lot of the insecurities and tensions of the relationship were played out in public. Today, if any Indian goes to Sri Lanka, it doesn't, I'm not talking here of, a governmental articulation or a diplomatic pronouncement. If you look at the popular goodwill in Sri Lanka of the ordinary citizen, it is very deep in people's consciousness that at a time when they were in the most unimaginable situation, where the entire world in a way had turned its back or at least, thrown up its hands. One neighbor stepped forward and stepped forward massively. For a country like India to put out $4.5 billion as a package, which eventually was almost twice the package of what the IMF gave, was not a small feat. And we did it without conditions. We did it at a time when, literally, that country was running out of food, it was running out of fuel, it was literally shutting down. So, it has had a very profound impact. We've had a change in Maldives. Yes, I accept that in the initial period, a lot of the political sharpness sort of came into play. But then, with each one of the neighbors, what happens? Once people settle down, they realize, okay, what is this relationship really about? Does it benefit us or does it harm us? And I think almost always they come to the conclusion that they stand much more to gain. And the reason for that is, in the last 10 years, we have consciously pursued what we call a neighborhood first policy, which is being very generous, being very non-reciprocal, being very non-transactional. So each one of our neighbors, during COVID, where did they get their vaccines first from? They got it from us. When Ukraine happened, they all had fuel problems. Where did they get their fuel? They got it from us. When fertilizers were in short supply, where did they get the fertilizer? They got it from us. So, and again, I made a passing reference to climate events. Our part of the world is very afflicted by these events. So, suddenly there's a rice shortage, there's an onion shortage, there's a lentil shortage, or there's a natural disaster. Now, if the sense is, look, here is a country, the biggest country of the region, doing its fair share but willing to go the extra mile for all of us. At the end of the day, we are there for all our neighbors. I think that has been the message. Now, it doesn't mean every relationship would be smooth. It doesn't mean that bad things won't happen. They would. It means we have to work our way through it. We have to reason with them. We have to, get them to understand what is in our collective interest. And this is what tending a relationship is all about. I mean, that's why people like us get to do what we're doing. And your last question, which might be an interesting way of closing the session, I think did you ask me?
Is Trump going, this is our last question. We thought we would end on this question as it's very current. Is Trump going to be a real success? Question came from Gautam Veer, Scapa Consultancy. And the questions before were Swati MG from East Data and Gomathi C. Sitha Rahman from Aragoya Yatra. So those.
Well, I'm tempted to ask you define success, because if a person has become the President of the United States twice, I think we'd be right to say he's successful.
Yes, yeah.
Right? Now, on top of that, if I were to put to you, which I did, saying, look, here's a person with strong ideas who's trying to change the framework of the global order to a point where even when he's not in office, many of his ideas and concepts are still being debated. I mean, I think that's perhaps another yardstick of success. So look, he would be, rather than use that word, I would say, I mean, no question, he has been hugely impactful. I think he will continue to be hugely impactful. And I think for anybody in the diplomatic line of work, we are surely in for very interesting times.
I concur. Interesting times, and he's been voted in, in a big democracy, and the people have the right to choose who they want to be president. They've voted, and now we wait and see what he's going to deliver. But a huge thank you, Your Excellency, Dr. Jaishankar.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister and Ms. Isobel, for the engaging discussion on why Bharat matters. I thank you all for being present, and I hope that you would find this book a compelling read. Have a great evening ahead. Thank you all.